So let's talk about the scalability and automation aspect of this. What's the challenge? So the big challenge we're finding now is customers expecting that out-of-band should not be an exception. It's not a tool that, oh, I have all these normal procedures, but when I introduce this tool, it's going to be an exception, and I'm going to make allowances for it. They want it to be easy to deploy. They want it to now join in adjacency, meaning whatever they're doing for adjacency and connection troubleshooting, they want that to be available in the out-of-band tool. So a lot of this is new. In the past, it would have been, it's a console server and it has its own special rules, so we're going to exclude it from how we normally do things. But now they want to adopt it into what they normally do, and instead of just serial over IP, they're realizing this is a device that sits in every row in my data center and attaches to every single one of my network pieces of equipment. And maybe there's some other things I can do with it beyond just serial over IP. So we kind of have this advanced tool set that kind of goes beyond just the serial over IP aspect or the SSH sessions. We're doing zero provisioning for Opengear out-of-band deployment. So our gear goes out and it can use zero-touch provisioning to configure itself. We're also seeing it where people are asking us to be the zero-touch provisioning server, and we'll talk about a little bit like what's driving that. And we're seeing that they're asking for LLDP and CDP support for the adjacency I mentioned. And this is really in the last year a real broader USB console support, and we'll talk about that. And then of course they're looking for a solution that's really extensible and flexible. I mean, they have different utilities, different agents, a lot that changes that they want the tool to be able to support. So what I did is I kind of created a little chart of, well, what is the classic out-of-band versus what is the future out-of-band? And so I took all the kind of normal classic out-of-band stuff like serial over IP, serial ports, maybe 1 and 2 network. We've got some additional things like Wi-Fi and USB storage and TFP servers built in. And that's been a real classic flavor for out-of-band right up to 2016. But then what you'll see here, everything in black, are all types of utilities and interactions, RESTful APIs, different types of utilities and support. So this entire list here is a bunch of things customers request that said, this is what I want out of that out-of-band solution. And the interesting thing is, this list has nothing to do with making an SSH session to a console port. It has everything to do with making their world easier and fitting into their world. And so that's what they were coming back to say. Hey, I get the SSH part's fine, I'm connecting to my console ports, but I need this thing to work well in my environment. So on adjacency, LLDP is not new. The concept is not new. What's new here is that people are saying, I want my out-of-band solution to do that. And we get the biggest request from that from large customers with these dual-homed environments. They're deploying 100 to 200 units, and they want to know that the deployment went well. So they want to be able to go to a Cisco device, type in show CDP neighbor, and have that show up the information to show you that it's it's an Opengear device. So in this case, it's my ACM 7004 in my lab, and it could see that. And if I go to the Opengear device and I do the same command, I can actually see that it's a Cisco attached to me. So that's new. Why do they care about that? The reason is when you deploy 200 at one go, you want your provisioning systems to be able to interrogate the system to say, is everything lined up the way it should be? The other aspect to it is, if there's troubleshooting going on and you can't get to one, you can maybe get to your console server. Maybe you come in on your LTE connection. You can use this adjacency to make sure that from an IP standpoint, you can see it. The alternative in the past would have been ping. Can I ping it? There's no, that's okay, but that's not going to tell you a lot. Maybe it has the right address, but it's the wrong host. So that's really what drove customers to ask for this support. And so we actually just implemented this in our release we did this week. And we've got a lot of excitement over it. So let's talk a little bit about the USB support. Why do I need USB for serial console ports? They're RJ45, they're RS-232. What's going on with that? Well, over the last year, we saw a real growing request for USB support. Part of that is the vendors are moving in that direction in some cases, but also maybe an adoption of white box solutions. There are customers who said this year we're not going to do any branded product. We're going to go white box it, and we're going to put our own OS and our own systems on those devices. And when they get those, they may not have an RJ45 console port, so they may have a USB. And those customers are actually going to be high density customers. So historically, there was support for one type of USB port, and that was that one Cisco driver, and that was about 99% of our requests that we got from customers for USB support. So the real need is for this kind of scale form factor. I can maybe I have 4 devices in one rack. Maybe I've got an open compute thing going on, and I've got 40 devices in one rack, and so I might have up to 4 to 16 device needs for USB. But it's also, it needs to be mixed because customers use the USB for storage, and they use it for different stuff. And so we have to be able to adapt. If they plug in a storage device, we have to say, okay, that port's no longer a serial port, it's now for storage, and we have to be able to adapt in the software and the numbering on ports to say, that's not available anymore for serial, that's a storage port. And of course, the biggest thing was, what about a new device that comes on? How easy is it going to be to put new drivers in there? Do I have to do a whole new firmware? Do I have to wait till your next firmware rev to do that? Or can I just simply add that on the go? So if you look in the past, there was that one Cisco device, and that we did get a lot of requests, and we only had that one request for that device. But when we went to develop this, we asked our customers, hey, we're doing this, what kind of devices do you need? And just the list we got back surprised us. It wasn't just Cisco, it was Brocade, it was NetApp, it was Dell, it was EMC storage. So there was actually, over that period of 1 year, actually people started coming back and saying, yeah, actually we do need this. I mean, here's a classic example. A Cisco ASR 920. It has an Ethernet management port. But then if you look at the serial port, it's a USB. What do I do with that? If anyone's ever tried to hook up their laptop with the USB dongle and try to figure out those drivers, especially in the Mac, you know that that's no easy feat. And so we did a good job of engineering that support, making it flexible. And what you'll find in the industry with out-of-band solutions here is that there's about 5 basic drivers that cover about 90% or 99 or even 100% of those USB devices. So this group was added in the past. It was maybe that one driver, so now we've got additional drivers in there, and we have a framework. So if there's a 6th set of drivers, or some new company comes out and they invent a new tool, new device, we can actually easily add in that support. Make sense so far? Okay. So here's another one, ZTP. Like LLDP, ZTP is not necessarily a brand new idea, and it's not new to, we're not inventing the idea of ZTP in the out-of-band world, but what's new is in large-scale deployments, customers are now saying, we use ZTP for all of our other devices. This is a common framework, and we have auto-provisioning systems built up around this. And what we'd like is for you, Mr. Out-of-Band solution provider, to do the same thing. We don't want to have different install procedures for you, and maybe I'm going to buy 300 from you at one time, and I need to just rack them fast and easy. So the first thing was, can you configure a template file? And that's okay, but a template file is just a tar file, and it's just a template. You're still going to have to get in and do IP settings on it. You're still going to have to do host names. So it's low-touch provisioning. It's not ZTP. So what they wanted was a file format that could be easily edited. And they wanted to have config commands and other scripts inside it. And I'll show you an example and why that's important. But they also wanted to upgrade firmware. What happens when they bought those 200 units and then a security patch comes out 5 weeks later? They put them in the rack and they've got old firmware. They're immediately out of compliance. So what they're doing here is they want to make sure when that thing goes in the rack and it gets booted up and configured, it's an absolute compliance for configuration, like firewall settings and others, and firmware. So they wanted to be able to specify an image to upgrade. They wanted the DHCP server to hand out that information. And the idea is they wanted to make sure that when it went in, they didn't have to go back to the device and do a few more things. So what we did was, in the DHCP process, we identified ourselves from an attribute. So we send out a request and we say, I need an address, but we also say, I need, you know, I'm an Opengear device, I'm an IM7216. And the DHCP server knows, says, okay, I recognize, I know who you are, and also I see your MAC address, I've got a file for you, and I've got a configure, and I've got firmware updates for you. And we'll go ahead, we'll download that firmware, we'll download the configuration script, and we'll run it. So here's an example. It's a little clipped. I'm sorry about that. But the idea with the script is I can put all of my variables up top. So I can say like an IP variable, subnet, anything I want to have that's different for each device, but it's going to be a common field. I can have these variables up front. And then I can actually put in firmware upgrades in the script, or I can have it external as a separate process. But I can run any kind of Linux or configuration command that the box supports. So here would be our config commands pulling a variable, $IP. And the nice feature about this is if you have an automated provisioning server and you say, I'm going to install an Opengear, and its MAC address is this, and this is its host name and IP address, the automation system can actually create the text file, and it will then name that text file with the MAC address, and it'll put it up on the TFTP server or the HTTPS server, and then it's completely automated. You know, you just go in, you fill out the form, and it generates a file, puts it up there, you power up the device, and you know that when it boots up, it's going to be completely configured the way you want.
And that's just a straight up shell script that I could run on any Linux platform?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the beauty of it. I'm copying it down, and you can edit it. So if you're a customer, you say, yeah, Opengear, give me this example, and from there, I'm going to do my stuff, and I'm going to customize it.
So is your box a full-blown Linux distro, or is it?
It's a good question. It's a embedded Linux running UC Linux. So we have writable space, like etc config is writable space, and that's a big help. That's that extensible part. And so we can run scripts, and that's exactly what this is. This is a script we copy down and execute.
Is it Born or Ash? Which shell specifically is it using?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. They do run it like a bash script, so I don't know if that answers your question.
There's extensions in Bash that aren't supported in Ash or standard Born shell, and so that's important to know.
Okay.
For when it comes to actually deploying this. So.
Okay. So I don't know the answer. We can get it to you, though. We can get you that answer as a follow-up. So once we said we're doing ZTP for us, customers came to us and said, look, I've moved away from a traditional model, and now I'm deploying some stuff with cloud provisioning. And I have a new network going in, but there's no network. So how do I provision to the cloud if there's no network? So I can't. It's a cart before the horse problem. And they said, can you be the zero-touch provisioning server? And the reason for that is we have DHCP services running on the box, and it so happens to be a very common one, an ISC DHCP server. Very common format. It's very well known. And we have TFTP and FTP services running, and we have 16 gig of storage space. So we've worked up examples with Arista and Juniper, and we're working up some ideas with Cisco support on this so that we can actually become the ZTP server for remote deployment. And it's really especially true with anything that's in SDN or cloud deployments where they have to get out to some kind of provisioning server. If the provisioning server is not there, what are you going to do? How are you going to do that? And so we had a customer with a classic example where they deployed the devices in the data center. The management the management port on these devices was really only used day one for provisioning, and then after that you did everything through production. And they didn't really plan out how to connect to that. So what they had to do is go around with a crash cart and a 4-port switch and a DHCP server, plug into 4 devices, boot them up, configure them, upgrade their firmware, and then verify it, and then move on. And so for the whole data center, it took them 2 days. And they said, look, we want to set this up. And we did a lab trial where we created a management LAN using a physical connection to the back of our device as well as Wi-Fi. So the 7200 supports Wi-Fi. And they said, hey, I can get a Wi-Fi adapter here, put it in bridge mode, and if I plug it into that Ethernet port, it's going to get a DHCP address from you. He's going to ask for his image and his configuration, and you can supply that. And so what we were able to do is take that 2-day that 2-day time period and bring it down to 2 hours. And they felt like if they had set it up ahead of time with the right connections, they could have brought it down to 20 minutes. So the ROI on being able to do this and have us be the ZTP server is huge. And there's a lot of expansion there. There's LTE in here. We can actually be a gateway out to a cloud provisioning server day one at a remote site.
What about ZTP over LTE? So a device is out there, its only connection is LTE.
Yeah, so it gets tricky because you have to provision. If you're used to provisioning on a web server over the internet, it's okay. If you're used to being inside a private network, you have to work that out as well.
Yeah, I mean, assuming we could get, there would be some touch, it wouldn't be absolute zero touch, but provisioning over LTE would be useful.
Absolutely, and some of the difficulties there is that we get a DHCP address from the carrier. And then if I send out a provisioning request out, the carrier's going to say, what is this? So we have to create tunnels, we've got to create, it's an ongoing, it's kind of the next step. Yeah. That's where this is going.
Yeah, I mean, you have to give it some kind of a, hey, this is where you're going to go, but that's all you need to know. You know, very low touch.
Yeah.
More than zero touch.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly.